I'm Paul Duchesne. Welcome to Mama Paul's video podcast. Today is May 1st. It's Saturday, May 1st. So welcome May Day. May Day. I'm sure thousands of people are probably marching all over the country right now for workers' rights. Yeah, that's a joke. Okay, what I was going to mostly do today was a series of sort of newsy kinds of updates centered around the general theme of our broken democracy. When Donald left office back in January, there was a sigh of relief throughout the entire country when we didn't start to wake up every morning like we had been for the last 4 years with another tragic tale of some absurd thing that came out of his mouth. And it seemed like he was going away a little bit. And I guess he did go away a little bit. He got out of the news every day, and he's not as authoritative as he had been, and he's not on Twitter and everywhere else. But he's still there. He is still there. He's still rearing his ugly head. And what's going on in Arizona is a really interesting example of this whole thing. The whole QAnon stop the steal crazy people have been, and this is coming directly out of Mar-a-Lago, this whole movement. And Trump's been obsessed with it for the last couple of weeks. And what's going on, these people, this group, were able to force their way through the judicial system enough to get these people to agree to let them do a recount. Now, this recount is being done by a group called, what's the name of this group? They're the Cyber Ninjas. The Cyber Ninjas is a group, and it's founded by one of the QAnon conspiracy people. And they're going in there and they've got their hands on the ballot. And initially when they had their hands on the ballot, they wouldn't let anybody in to even look at what they were doing. They didn't have any procedures. A couple of back and forth to the courts. I think the whole thing has finally been stopped. But in the middle of this, they were handling ballots with black and blue pens in their hand. And as soon as you touch another kind of pen to a ballot, you'll destroy the ballot. So after they made them stop that, then they brought in these UV lights, and you can't make this stuff up. This is like so ludicrous. It's just ludicrous. Supposedly, Trump secretly, somehow, got a bunch of ballots that had specific watermarks on them into the hands of Democratic voters who were voting early. And there was some strange way they were going to come up with the fact that there were a bunch of illegal votes cast. These storylines coming out. Anything that's connected with QAnon just gets so weird so quickly that you just can't believe it. You're scratching your head. So supposedly he somehow insinuated a whole bunch of these ballots that he's got this secret watermark on it for some reason. It's going to indicate some malfunction in the early voting. The other thing these guys have got going is, what was the thing? Oh, the KAT, right. Kineactive Artifact Detection. Kineactive Artifact Detection. And what they're doing is they're looking at the UV lights. They're looking to see a fold. And if you folded the paper, it's going to put some little dotty lines in the fold, and you'll be able to read that with the UV light, and that'll be an indication that it was an early ballot somebody made up. Trump's calling these guys every 15 minutes to stay on top of it. Their goal was to go into Arizona, overturn a couple of 100,000 votes to show that the election was stolen, and then move on to Michigan, and then move on to Florida and Arizona. And they have this whole plan in place to move on through all these states. Well, the judge shut them down. As of last night, as far as I know, the judge shut this whole thing down. Now, what's going to happen Monday? I don't know. We'll find out. It's an interesting story to follow. Rachel's been all over it like a fly on. New York Times has covered it a little bit. I don't think the Wall Street Journal's had it. Huffington Post hasn't really covered it much either. Breitbart hasn't covered it much either. Rachel seems to be the biggest one covering the story, which means that it'll make a bigger splash in the New York Times as the story unfolds. So that was sort of one of the most ridiculous things going on this week. That's sort of hard to wrap your head around. But before I get to the voting restrictions, you've also got anti-protesting laws getting put into effect in Florida. They're lined up to do it in Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas. And what they want to do is make peaceful protesting illegal. And then if you get arrested for peaceful protesting, where they can identify you, then you won't be eligible for any student loan or government aid or food stamps. However, if you drive a car into the group of protesters, you won't be liable for any damages. If you drive a car into the protesters, you won't be liable for any damages. I mean, has this got white supremacy written all over it or what? This is just getting so... The Russians put a lot of effort into screwing up our democracy here, and they've done a really good job. Now, the democracy to start with wasn't in great shape. And with all of this stuff for the last 4 years or 8 years or however long they've been punching the bag of our democracy here, they're really making quite a mess of things. And they're succeeding on quite a level. The voting restriction thing, Florida, well, started in Georgia. Now they're looking at Texas, Florida, Michigan. Right now, Jim Carville brought this up on one of the shows over the weekend. 18% of the population elects 55 of the senators in the Senate. 18% of the people. Let me maybe come over here. Just write it down for a second. Do I have a red pen here? Oh yeah, 18%. 18% elect 55 of the senators. Now there's only 100 senators, so more than 50% of the senators, more than 55 senators are elected by 18% of the people. Hardly a democracy, which is why we call it a democratic republic. It's more of a republic than it is a democracy. The Russian influence over here. Rachel the other night made a list of about a dozen items, connections that have been going on with Russia between Giuliani's two goons that were collaborating in the Ukraine, and Roger Stone and Paul Manafort. I mean, the list goes on, and then not reacting to the Russian involvement with paying off in Afghanistan, and cutting back on the NATO troops, and one thing after another. And she literally said, "It's making me sick. The whole thing is making me sick." And what's really weird is how come this guy isn't in jail yet? How come all of these people aren't in jail? The Russian connection is so obvious and so in your face, day after day after day. How come somebody hasn't been, slapped the word treason on them? I mean, when you get into this thing going on with Giuliani and the Russia connection, so Giuliani appears to be, after Paul Manafort, Giuliani appears to be Trump's main point man connecting with Russia. So he's over there in Ukraine, and he goes over to Ukraine, and the Ukrainians that are in power at the time want to get rid of this our representative there. So Giuliani sees that it's done. So he's operating on the behalf of the Ukrainian government while he's the personal lawyer for Donald Trump. He's got his foot in the government boat, and he's got his foot in the personal boat. Well, if he's going to be doing a favor for a foreign government, he needs to register, and he never registered. So this is the big reason that they wound up breaking into his apartment the other day and pulling out all these records. I can't imagine how much stuff they're going to find on this guy. Giuliani is such a piece of... During the 90s, when the crime wave was going on in New York, at the end of the day, Giuliani started to take huge amounts of credit for fixing the problem. He never fixed the problem. In fact, just the other night, I found out I knew that he was a cancer sore on the whole problem there. And he would say one thing and the opposite was happening. The way they cleaned up the problem on the Upper West Side and the Upper East Side in Manhattan was they had street patrols local street patrols started to go out in the 90s to watch the streets and clean up. That's how they solved the crime problem on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. It wasn't Giuliani. What Giuliani did was he empowered the cops to use more brute force. And one of the people I saw on one of the talk shows this weekend talked about the term giving somebody a Giuliani meant beating somebody with a baton. Beating somebody with a baton was called giving somebody a Giuliani, and that I hadn't heard. The Giuliani, all during the 80s, as this prosecutor in New York, he was prosecuting these low-level, what looked like gangsters. The mobs, in general, fight with each other a lot. And who's ever the dominant mob at the time is who Giuliani is working with. And what they did during the 80s was they went after a bunch of low-level people in the gangs that Giuliani wasn't connected with, literally. He didn't go after the people he was connected with, which was quite a few. Which is why, at the end of the day, when Giuliani's, pounding himself on the chest there, he's the savior of the 9/11 savior and everything. When 9/11 happened, the reason he was so close to downtown was that him and Kerrick, his chief of police, had a little love nest apartment in Lower Manhattan that was close to where their emergency center was, which wasn't ready for the 9/11 attack when it happened. Giuliani is sort of in the middle of so many corruption scandals, and has been for a long time, that it's not surprising right now that the DOJ broke into his place. I'm really looking forward to seeing this guy go down. He has been such a sore on the whole democratic system in this whole country here. It's really been disgusting what this guy's been doing. So Giuliani, when he's over there in the Ukraine doing this deal, he's working with a guy called Andrei Derkeshov, who is a known Russian agent, known by our Justice Department to be a Russian agent, and Giuliani is warned that he's a Russian agent. Ron Johnson, the Republican from Wisconsin, who's the other right-wing loony guy that you hear about quite a bit, Ron Johnson, he's also involved in this whole deal. He's also warned directly by the FBI that that Andrei is a Russian agent. In spite of that, they both go over, and he's the main person that Giuliani is dealing with in doing these deals to get this supposed dirt on Biden and Biden's son, and to get rid of the ambassador who's over there, who was stopping up their corruption that they were trying to do. So that's a little bit about the Giuliani story over there, and the fact that the two guys, I can't think of their name now, Boris is one, and one of them has been on television quite a bit and has made quite a splash, and pretty much has spilled the beans. Giuliani, when he was working for Trump, he wasn't even paid by Trump. In fact, he did. He worked for free because he had so much access to so much money. And these two guys that came in to work with Giuliani, they paid Giuliani to work with him because Giuliani had so much access to Trump, who's representative of so many of these contracts and everything like that. So it's this vicious circle of greed and corruption, and Giuliani's right in the middle of this thing. Donald Trump is the head of this thing, the absolute head of this thing. Whew, wow. Okay, so voting rights, voter suppression, craziness going on in Arizona. I'll go to a slightly lighter story, which would be cryptocurrencies. Actually, let me go back 1 second on the democracy thing. I had two things in the paper I wanted to just bring up. One was I talked about Texas. Look at this headline here. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. Look at this headline. Okay, so what's going on is Texas Republicans are targeting voter access, find their bullseye. Cities. So cities is where most of the people that they're trying to eliminate from voting live. And that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to kill their voting ability. On drive-through voting and harsh criminal penalties for local officials who provide assistance to voters. Texas is imposing harsh penalties if any local elected official provides assistance to a voter. So if you're waiting on a line, it's a long line, you got to wait 2 or 3 hours to get in to vote, and some local official comes over and gives you a chair. It's a criminal penalty there. It's going to be a criminal penalty. Criminal penalty in Texas. At the front end of this, we said Texas is taking place. The effort to restrict voting in Texas is taking place against a backdrop of a showdown between legislators and Texas-based corporations, with Republicans in the House proposing financial redistribution for companies that have spoken out. We talked about this on the last show I did. I talked about the corporations and their connection to this whole voting issue. American Airlines and Dell Technologies both voiced strong opposition to the bill. And AT&T issued a statement supporting voting laws that make it easier for more Americans to vote. Well, AT&T came out with a statement in Georgia also, and the next day when it came up to sign the We Stand for Democracy, I think I showed you this. Let me get it. I showed you this last week. Well, yeah, I'm going to put it over here. I showed you this last week. This was the paper that was in the Times. This was a couple hundred people. The Black and Economic Alliance put together this conference call, which led to this signing in the New York Times about over a week ago. And like I said, AT&T spoke up immediately about the issue in Georgia, and then immediately backed off and didn't sign the. And the same thing happened with Delta Airlines and Coca-Cola. Both of them immediately jumped in and complaining about the voting laws, and then didn't participate in the signing of this. Although they did issue a strong statement saying that they supported this. Even with the unlikely odds of passing, simply placing the proposal on the record, putting the proposal on the record in the Texas legislature, not even passing it, just putting it on the record, is seen by lobbyists as a thinly veiled warning to businesses to stay quiet on the voting issue. Well, about every other day in the paper this last week or so, there's been either an editorial or an op-ed about this very topic. Some people talking about the cynicism of it, other people talking about the benefits of it, other people saying it doesn't matter. Lots of comments. It's a major issue. We're going to follow this because of the fact that the corporation is so powerful an institution in the society we live in. Okay, the other one I wanted to mention about this topic of democracy. This was I've been following this story for a long time. I'm a big Myanmar fan. The meditation I do, the mindful meditation I do, I learned it from a guy, Gwenka, who came from Burma. A lot of these forest monks in the middle of Burma were sort of isolated from the civilian populations for hundreds of years, and didn't really start to come out from these monasteries until the 60s. Whereas a larger Buddhist population encompassed the entire country. But for the last 4 decades, the military has been in control, and then they had a partnership with Aung San Suu Kyi. And anyway, they took complete control back in January, and the military. And week after week, day after day, there are people in the street protesting right and left. And the statement that really jumped out at me was, with the military's violence unleashed once again, some are acknowledging that democracy cannot flourish without respecting the ethnic minorities who have endured decades of persecution. The Rohingya are the Muslim minority. Well, beside that Muslim minority, there's dozens of other minorities around the country. And this Muslim minority has been specifically attacked, viciously, with burning villages and raping and killing and the usual thing that goes on. And it was able to take place because of the amount of propaganda about these people that's been perpetuated throughout the country for these last 10 years. They've just been turned him into a rag doll all over the place. And because of that, a lot of the people believed that the Rohingya were, running around doing these atrocious things, which they weren't. So as soon as people started to meet other people and they realized, oh, these guys aren't so bad. They might have a different religious belief, but they're not trying to persecute me or anything. So this was a real shocker that the minorities, the majority, is starting to accept the minorities in the country more openly, literally embracing some of them in an effort to put down this rebellion going on by the military, because they realize that democracy cannot function if you don't respect the rights of all the people. Just like the stuff you read about in these other countries, you can apply it here. So it's almost like a cut and paste. We've got people 55 senators chosen by 18% of the people. Okay, so I think I lost things here. I did. Let me go back here. The Senate right now, it's 50-50, but of the 50-50, Joe Manchin might as well be on the Republican Party. So it's almost 51-49. I do not know. I have no idea why Murkowski and the few senators that are a little bit rational and appear to be saying sane things now and then haven't come out against the party and started to act on their own. It's got to happen. If this whole Republican Party stays in lockstep with Trump, we're either going to move into an autocracy and destroy the democracy, which it appears like they're trying to do, or what obviously needs to happen is people watching this we need to figure out how we are going to counteract or be a balancing force for these other forces that are out there. How we're going to balance what's out there. I feel like we need to be, I'm not sure if it's in the street or where we need to be or how we need to be doing it, but I know we need to be doing something, and I'm not exactly sure what it is. So it's 22 minutes in. I wanted to do a tiny story on cryptocurrencies. At the end of Bill Marshall last night, he did his little riff on Bitcoins. And if you have a chance, it's worthwhile watching. I have read a dozen articles about Bitcoins, and I still have a tremendously hard time trying to understand exactly what's going on with them. The other day, this was this cute picture. Look at these two. Look at these two over here. Oh, he's so into his little art scene in New York, isn't he? A little New York art collector there. That's collectors Jill and Peter Krause in their apartment with Popeye's A Sunny Days. The name of this painting. Let me show you the painting again. That's the painting. You see it? It's called Sunny Days White Power. I don't know why they would show a picture of these two art collectors in New York with this painting, this string hanging off of it, called Sunny Day White Power. Anyway, the quote that was worthwhile here was, why pay $69 million? Why pay $69 million? Somebody just paid the other day for some NFT with a non-fungible transaction. That's something that anyone can see online. Why pay $69 million for something anyone can see online? He's a chairman of the advisory firm Aperture Investors. He said of NFTs, non-fungible transactions. Well, Bill Maher did a whole riff about them and how he basically considered them meaningless and worthless. And they're being accepted more and more places. There's a whole dozens of recent business, including Starbucks, that are starting to take these things. The worst thing about them is the amount of energy it takes to produce them. What they do is somebody's sitting down at a computer and he's putting in, they write these algorithms, they put in information, and another computer has to find the information, a third computer. They have this blockchain system of verifying and searching for numbers to create this almost impossible way an impossible, literally an impossible way for you to track transactions so that you can create a secure system. So they've created this security within the internet by people sitting down, spending hundreds of hours doing millions of transactions, which have to take place in these computers, which need to be kept cool. It takes more energy to create a few bitcoins than it does to power the whole island of Manhattan. The carbon footprint damage from these bitcoins is, when you start to look at it, it's just astronomical. We could probably eliminate get rid of all the oil and everything else going on the planet right now, and have them just keep producing bitcoins. We're going to sink the whole planet with bitcoin. Believe me, it's just mind-boggling how much energy it takes to produce one single bitcoin and the pollution that goes along with it. Lastly, well, I showed you a couple of these. Let me just I'll flip over here. That's the Adbusters. Fake Planet. I picked up this book, and I was going to talk about Adbusters. I got about halfway through the book so far, and I read it every month, and sometimes it's more interesting than others, and I'm halfway through the book right now, and it's really interesting because they brought up he brought up this thing in the book, in the magazine, about formalistic economics, and I didn't even know what the heck they meant by it, and I was an economic major. And basically, and Robert Heilbronner, who I studied with, is quoted in Adbusters. Well, yeah, we'll go back here. There's the magazine, and that's last month's issue. So I'll put it back in my hand here. And he's quoted in the magazine here as saying that economics will not progress. Before economics can progress, it must abandon its suicidal formalism. Well, what does he mean by? I've read this, and I've read this in the past. One of these things you read and it goes over you, and it's like, okay. What they're talking about is the formalism refers basically to the logic of rational action and decision making. Economics is rational action and rational decision making. It's a rational choice between alternative uses of limited resources. So formalistic economics means that people make rational choices in distributing scarce materials. What they call substantive economics is basically seeing that people adapt to their environment, and people don't always make decisions that are rational, and people don't always make decisions that you can calculate. And so that's formalism versus substantive. Now the formalism turned into econometrics, which is where they measured everything. Everything is measured. So they're saying, well, if we measure this and measure that, and then we can figure out and predict what something is going to happen. Well, they're never right. They're never right, because there's too many subjective factors involved in the decision making. And in the last year or so, two prominent economists came to the fore with some major writing exactly on this topic, and it went by me many months ago, and I didn't realize that I'd be sitting here right now talking about formalism versus substantivism. I had no idea what the words even meant. So anyway, I looked that up, I downloaded, got 5 pages off Wikipedia. Now I know what formalistic economics is, and what was really interesting about it is when I read the quote, I said to myself, well, isn't Robert Heilbronner, wasn't that formal economics that he was teaching? I figured it just meant the traditional economics, but it didn't necessarily just mean traditional economics. It sort of encompasses traditional economics, but it meant anything that you could measure. So if you couldn't measure it, if there were humanistic factors coming in, it's not formalistic. Okay, that was it there, and I guess I had a few other. Well, it's pushing a half hour right now. I was going to talk about this artistic lady over here who talks about the existential dilemmas that we're in right now. A mind, body, spirit. This just came out. It's going to This comes out every year, and Mind, Body, Spirit comes out every year. It's a monthly magazine or quarterly magazine, but they do the 100 most influential spiritual people once a year, and this is sort of interesting, and I'll talk about that maybe next time. And I discovered this new book, Capitalism and Slavery. Some of you may know I published a little essay on capitalism and slavery, and I just discovered this book by Eric Williams, and it was written in 1944, the year I was born. So I'm reading that now, and I'll talk about that a little bit more next time also. So it's been a half hour, that's more than enough. So things are getting a little bit, there are positive signs out there. I'm not sure what they are, but I'm sure that there's some positive signs out there, and I'll look for them and see if we can find them by next week. Peace, patience, and persistence, and thanks for joining in. Thanks.